Hi, for this video I'm going to answer some questions that I've gotten over the years in regards to what I use to make my scores. I'm going to answer questions about DAWs or digital audio workstations, what virtual instruments I use, which VSTs, analog like hardware synthesizers, hardware gear, interfaces, the whole nine. I'm going to answer all of those questions. And I'm going to give some recommendations for up-and-coming film composers. And the really cool thing is we're actually going to open up a score that I did about 5 years ago when I first kind of started delving into film scoring more full-time. And we're going to look at that cue, and it's funny enough, that cue, out of all the instruments in that opening scene, one instrument is not a free VST. So let's jump right on in. DAWs, digital audio workstations. I use Logic. I've used it for a long time now, and I'm pretty comfortable with it. Some other composers that I know use Cubase. There's one called Reaper, which is more in-depth, and then there's Pro Tools as well. There's quite a few different DAWs that you can use. I like to think of them, like I said in my last video, it's just a canvas, just a blank space where you can kind of throw instruments onto to create. And I've used Logic and it works for me, so whatever works for you, just try out different ones. VSTs, when I first started out, I only used the stuff in Logic because I didn't have any money, and I just learned from there. I actually learned synthesis from the soft synths in Logic. When I first started out, I really wanted to understand what synthesis was. I used the synthesis in the synth engine in Logic, and it's great. There are some okay orchestral instruments. When I first got my first real set of orchestral sounds, I got the East-West package. I think it was like $400 or $500 at the time. And I got a myriad of stuff from strings to percussion to woodwinds to brass, kind of the whole nine. If you're starting out and you don't have a lot of money, Spitfire Audio has released some really cool stuff by their stuff called Labs, and it's just free samples. Hardware, there's so much out there. You've got compressors, you've got preamps, you've got channel strips, you've got all sorts of stuff. But what I recommend for people to really get early on is a decent interface that converts your audio signals into digital. If you get a really bad interface, your audio recordings that you record in, if you do a lot of things outside of the box, so not virtual instruments, they won't sound great. They'll sound really low quality. So if you have money to invest, I'd invest in a decent interface. You know, whatever your budget is, start from there and you can always build. Some other things you want to invest in is a decent pair of reference monitors, headphones, and Midi controllers. I use the Adams Audios for my reference monitors, and I just use some AKG headphones for headphones. And for controllers, I have a Roland keyboard for my main Midi controller. I like the touch of it. And then I also use a Roly, like an MPE controller. But honestly, the only thing you need are headphones and a Midi controller starting out, if that's all you can afford. Last thing I want to recommend is more than one screen. I currently have two, and I'm even considering getting another one. As you start to progress in your film composition, you're going to need more windows. You have one for your DAW, you have one for the actual picture you're writing music to, maybe one for notes. It's important to have more than one screen to be able to see everything and work properly. So now, I want to show you a cue that I wrote 5 years ago. I chose this because it was when I first started really getting into film scoring, and I didn't have a lot of resources. So let's jump right on in, and I hope this is somewhat informative and enjoyable. So the session's up and loaded, and we're ready to jump on in. 3 of the 4 sounds in this cue are VST soft synths in Logic. So if you own Logic, you can get pretty close to making these sounds. I did some tweaking with EQs, and I pulled up the engines and, you know, messed with it that way. But it's pretty accessible, and it's really easy. It's a really great tool to start composing with. So let's watch the cue, and then we'll break it down. So that's kind of the vibe. It's a pretty emotional film, and you figured this would be very soft because it's between a mother and her daughter, but it's foreshadowing something that's about to happen pretty early on in the film that's traumatic for the child. And I wanted to have sounds that were indicative of waves because this is on the beach, and there's a lot of beach in this film. So I chose instruments, soft synths that kind of had kind of a lot of noise baked into the sound, and then I did some noise sweeping and things like that in my soft synths when I was working on it. So let's jump just kind of right on into it. So the first one is called String Movements, which is a VST sound in Logic. And I dropped off some of the low end. So this is kind of our main pad. It provides a lot of the harmony. This cue shifts between two tonal centers, C major and E minor. So essentially the minor 1, the relative flat 6, whatever you're going to call it. So flat 6, 1. So it rocks between both of those. These two sounds are actually bass sounds that go together. And I dipped some of the kind of the low mids out a little bit for this sound. So it's just more of a rumble. And then the last one is this boarding area pads, which is another bass sound. And I cut a lot of low end off of this one because it's just really boomy if I don't have it. Yeah, there's a lot of low end in it, and it just cuts it out. And then the last thing that I have, which is playing the melody, is just a soft piano. And notice that the velocity, so the color of the notes the velocity is really soft, so it's lightly being played. If the velocity was much higher, say in the upper, kind of velocities, how much brighter that is. Really harsh. So like I said, I chose it to be softer for that reason. And the other thing about this piano is, if you notice, there's a lot of shelving to it, a crap ton of shelving. And I did that because it just cuts through a little better. I know that when there's more things going on, it loses some of its top end, so it doesn't have as much of a punch, but it's it just removes some of the top end, actually a lot of top end. So all three of those soft synths and the piano work together for this cue. Just to show you real quickly what a synth engine looks like in Logic. So this is Digital Errors synth. So you can control this matrix here. You can change the type of bowing, if it's a pick, if it's a strike. So there's your cutoff, there's your resonance. So you can do just in this one little section of the synth, there's so much more that we can get into. You can create some really cool sounds, and that also translates over into analog synthesizers. So this is kind of, like I said, where I learned synthesis. I hope that was somewhat informative. Like I said, you don't have to have 1,000 pieces of gear to make music for film. You can just use whatever sound you have in your DAW to get started and grow from there. Next week, we're going to take a deep dive into another score that I worked on. But in the meantime, comment below, say what VSTs you use, or soft synths you use, or what analog gear you use to make your scores. And subscribe, ring the bell, and I will see you guys next week.